He was the kind of man who could buy the entire city block without checking his bank account. She was a waitress counting dimes to buy insulin for her dying mother. They lived in two different worlds, separated by a velvet rope and $1 billion. But everything changed in a single heartbeat at an exclusive Manhattan restaurant. All it took was a spilled glass of wine, a cruel insult, and a specific antique ring on the billionaire's finger. When the waitress whispered, "Sir, my mother has a ring like yours," she didn't just interrupt his dinner, she shattered his entire reality. What happened next exposed a 30-year-old secret, destroyed a marriage, and proved that sometimes the poorest person in the room holds the richest legacy. You won't believe how this ends. The air inside Le Palais, Manhattan's most exclusive French dining establishment, smelled of truffle oil, old money, and fear. For Serena Vance, a 24-year-old waitress with worn-out soles and a heart heavy with worry, the fear was the dominant scent. "Table 9 is arriving in 4 minutes, the floor manager Pierre hissed, snapping his fingers in front of Serena's face. He was a short man whose blood pressure seemed to rise in direct correlation to the net worth of his guests. "Check the silverware. Check the crystal. If there is even a smudge of a fingerprint on a water glass, Serena, you are out. Do you understand? I don't care about your situation. I care about perfection." "Yes, Pierre, it's perfect. I checked it twice," Serena said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. She couldn't afford to lose this shift. She couldn't afford to lose this job. Just that morning, the pharmacy on Lexington Avenue had declined her card when she tried to pick up her mother's heart medication and insulin. Margaret Vance, her mother, was fading. The doctors at Mount Sinai called it congestive heart failure exacerbated by stress and lack of consistent care. Serena just called it a nightmare. She needed $300 by tomorrow morning, or her mother would go without the pills that kept her heart beating. The heavy oak doors of the restaurant swung open. The hush that fell over the dining room was immediate. Even the clinking of silverware ceased. Walking in was Arthur Sterling. At 55, Arthur was a titan. The CEO of Sterling Dynamics, he was the man who practically built the modern aerospace industry. He was tall, with silver fox hair styled impeccably back, wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than Serena would make in 5 years. But it wasn't just his wealth that commanded attention. It was his eyes. They were cold, steel blue, and seemingly devoid of any warmth. Hanging onto his arm was Vanessa Sterling, his wife of 3 years. She was 30 years his junior, a former runway model with sharp features and a gaze that judged everything it landed on as unworthy. She wore a red dress that screamed for attention and a diamond necklace that could feed a third-world country. "Serena, you're up. Don't look him in the eye unless he speaks to you," Pierre whispered, practically shoving her toward the table. Serena took a deep breath, smoothing her apron. She walked toward table 9, the best seat in the house, overlooking the glitter of Central Park at night. "This table is too close to the kitchen," Vanessa complained immediately, not even waiting to sit down. Her voice was shrill, cutting through the ambient jazz music. "Arthur, tell them to move us. I can smell the onions." Arthur sighed, a sound of deep, exhausted resignation. "Vanessa, this is the private alcove. It's the best table. Please, just sit." "I don't want to sit. I want service," she snapped, dropping her Hermes Birkin bag onto the pristine tablecloth. Serena stepped forward, forcing a polite smile. "Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Sterling. My name is Serena, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with sparkling water?" Vanessa interrupted, not looking at Serena. She was busy checking her reflection in her spoon. "With lime. and make sure the ice is crushed, not cubed. I hate cubed ice. It clinks too loudly." "Of course, Mom." "And for you, sir?" Serena turned to Arthur. Arthur was staring out the window, looking at the city lights. He looked incredibly lonely for a man who owned half the skyline. He turned slowly, and for a second his eyes locked with Serena's. He frowned, a flicker of confusion crossing his face, as if he was trying to remember a dream. "A scotch." "Neat. And—" "Bring the menu," Arthur said, his voice deep and gravelly. "Right away." As Serena walked back to the bar, her heart hammered against her ribs. She was exhausted. She had worked a double shift yesterday and hadn't slept because her mother had been coughing all night. "She looks like a drowned rat," she heard Vanessa say loudly as she walked away. "Arthur, why do we come here? The staff is getting so common." Serena gripped the tray tighter. "Focus," she told herself. "Do it for Mom. Just get through the night, get the tips, get the medicine." When she returned with the drinks, the tension at the table had thickened. Arthur was checking emails on his phone, and Vanessa was seething at being ignored. "Here is your water, Mom." "Crushed ice," Serena said softly, placing the crystal glass down on a coaster. She turned to Arthur to place his scotch. As she reached across, the heavy silver tray she was balancing shifted slightly. It wasn't a mistake, not exactly. Vanessa, in a fit of pique at Arthur's silence, had thrown her hand out to gesture wildly. "Arthur, put the phone away!" Vanessa shrieked, her hand colliding hard with Serena's elbow. It happened in slow motion. The tray tipped, the glass of scotch, filled with amber liquid, launched forward. It didn't hit Arthur. It splashed squarely onto Vanessa's red dress and the Hermes bag. The silence that followed was louder than a gunshot. "You stupid, clumsy little idiot!" Vanessa screamed, leaping to her feet. The red wine and scotch mixture soaked into the silk of her dress. "Look what you did! This is couture! This is vintage!" I am so sorry, Mom. You hit my arm. I didn't mean to." Serena stammered, grabbing a cloth napkin to help dab the mess. "Don't touch me." Vanessa slapped Serena's hand away. The sound echoed through the restaurant. "Get away from me. You're filthy. Arthur, do something. She ruined my bag." Pierre, the manager, was running towards them, his face pale as a sheet. "Mrs. Sterling, I am so sorry. So incredibly sorry." "Fire her!" Vanessa demanded, her face twisted into a mask of ugly rage. "I want her fired right now, and I want her to pay for this dress. It cost $12,000. Deduct it from her pathetic paycheck for the next 10 years for all I care." Arthur finally looked up from his phone. He stood up slowly. He didn't look at his screaming wife. He looked at Serena. Serena was shaking. Tears were stinging her eyes. Losing the job was one thing, but being sued for a dress? It would destroy her. She would end up in jail, and her mother would die alone in that dark apartment. "Sir, please," Serena whispered, looking at Arthur. "It was an accident, I swear." Arthur looked annoyed. He reached out his hand, perhaps to gesture for silence, or perhaps to grab his napkin. As he placed his hand on the white tablecloth, the overhead chandelier light caught the heavy gold object on his ring finger. It was a signet ring, but not a normal one. It was massive, made of old, dark gold, set with a flat, black obsidian stone. In the center of the obsidian was a gold inlay of a lion, but the lion had a distinct flaw, a jagged scratch across the lion's left eye, and a tiny ruby embedded in the lion's paw. Serena stopped breathing. The world around her, the screaming wife, the panicked manager, the clinking cutlery, faded into a dull hum. Her vision tunneled onto that ring. She knew that ring. She knew every curve of it. She knew the scratch on the lion's eye. She knew the ruby. She had seen it every day of her childhood. Without thinking, without caring about the job or the screaming woman, Serena took a step closer to the billionaire. "Sir," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried a strange, heavy authority that cut through Vanessa's screaming. Arthur paused. He looked at the waitress. "What?" Serena pointed a trembling finger at his hand. "That ring," she whispered. "The lion with the scar. The ruby in the paw." Arthur frowned, looking down at his hand. "What about it?" "My mother." Serena choked on the words, her eyes locking with Arthur's steel-blue gaze. "My mother has a ring exactly like yours. She keeps it under her pillow. She cries when she holds it." The reaction was instantaneous. Arthur Sterling, the man who had negotiated billion-dollar mergers without blinking, the man who was known as the Ice King of Wall Street, turned pale. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like he might faint. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He stared at Serena. Really stared at her. He looked at her jawline. He looked at the shape of her eyes. He looked at the way she held her hands. "What did you say?" Arthur whispered. His voice was trembling. "My mother," Serena repeated, tears spilling over. "Margaret. Margaret Vance. She has the twin to that ring." Vanessa sensed the shift in the atmosphere. She stopped wiping her dress and looked at her husband. "Arthur? What is she talking about? Who cares about her mother's cheap jewelry?" "Shut up, Vanessa," Arthur snapped. It was a tone so vicious, so commanding, that Vanessa actually flinched and stepped back. Arthur stepped around the table, ignoring the mess, ignoring the spilled scotch. He stood inches from Serena. He was a tall man, imposing, but he looked terrified. "Margaret?" he asked, his voice breaking. "You said Margaret Vance?" "Yes," Serena said. She's my mother." Arthur reached out, his hand shaking violently, and took Serena's chin in his fingers. He tilted her face to the light. "Blue eyes," he muttered to himself. "And the chin. My God." "Arthur!" Vanessa screeched, trying to regain control. "What are you doing touching the help? This is humiliating." Arthur spun around. "Pierre!" he roared. The manager jumped. "Yes, Monsieur Sterling. I am firing her right now. I will call security. If you touch her, I will buy this building and burn it to the ground with you inside it," Arthur growled. The threat was delivered with such cold intensity that Pierre froze mid-step. Arthur turned back to Serena. He gripped her shoulders. "Where is she? Where is Margaret?" She's at home," Serena stammered, confused by his intensity. "She's sick. She's very sick. Take me to her," Arthur commanded. He didn't ask. He didn't request. It was an order. Right now. "But your dinner," Serena said. "To hell with the dinner," Arthur said. He grabbed his jacket. "Arthur, you cannot leave me here covered in scotch," Vanessa shouted, stomping her foot. "We have the opera at 8. Who is this woman?" Arthur turned to his wife. His eyes were burning. "Vanessa, get the driver to take you home. Or stay here, I don't care. But if you say one more word, I will cancel your credit cards before you can blink." He looked back at Serena, his expression desperate. "Please, take me to her. I have been looking for that ring, and the woman who holds it, for 24 years. Serena looked at this powerful man, stripped of his arrogance, reduced to a desperate, shaking mess. She thought of her mother, lying in the dark apartment, clutching the ring she claimed was from a man who loved her once, a man she said died in a car crash. "Okay," Serena whispered. "Follow me." Vanessa was still screaming as the valet brought Arthur's car around, a sleek black Maybach that cost more than the entire apartment building Serena lived in. The valet, A young man named Kevin, who usually winked at Serena, looked terrified as he held the door open. "Get in," Arthur said. His voice was no longer angry. It was hollow, like a man walking to his execution. Serena hesitated. She was wearing her stained waitress uniform. Her shoes were cheap, non-slip sneakers covered in kitchen grease. "Sir, I can't sit in there. I'll get the bus. I'll meet you." "Get in!" Arthur didn't shout, but the intensity in his eyes brooked no argument. Serena slid onto the hand-stitched leather seats. The car smelled of cedar and expensive cologne. It was a terrifyingly quiet sanctuary compared to the chaos they had just left. Arthur slid in beside her. He tapped the privacy glass partition. "Where to?" he asked. "The Bronx," Serena said quietly. 122nd Street, the brick building on the corner. Arthur nodded to the driver. As the car pulled away from the curb, leaving a fuming Vanessa Sterling stomping on the sidewalk, Arthur pulled out his phone. His fingers flew across the screen. "Johnson!" he barked into the phone, presumably speaking to a lawyer or a private investigator. "I need a file pulled. Archived personnel records from 1999. Cross-reference with the obituary records of a woman named Margaret Vance. Do it now. I don't care what time it is. Wake the clerk up." He hung up and stared out the window. The city lights blurred by. "You said she has the ring," Arthur said, breaking the silence after 10 minutes. He didn't look at Serena. He couldn't. "How long has she had it?" "My whole life," Serena answered, hugging her arms around herself. "She told me my father gave it to her. She said it was a promise ring, a promise that he would come back for us." Arthur flinched as if he'd been slapped. "And? Did he?" Serena let out a bitter, short laugh. "No. She said he died. A car accident in France, right before I was born. That's what his family told her. They sent a letter. No body, no funeral invite. Just a letter saying, 'Arthur is dead. Stop contacting us.'" Arthur's hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles turned white. "Dead," he whispered. "They told her I was dead." "So she kept the ring," Serena continued, her voice gaining a little strength. "She pawned everything else we owned over the years. Her wedding band, her grandmother's silver, the TV. But she never pawned that ring. She said it was the only piece of him she had left. Sometimes when the pain is bad, she talks to it." Arthur closed his eyes. A single tear, shocking and out of place on his stoic face, rolled down his cheek. He quickly wiped it away. The scenery outside changed. The glittering skyscrapers of Manhattan gave way to the potholed streets and dim streetlights of the Bronx. The Maybach looked like a spaceship that had landed on the wrong planet. They passed boarded-up storefronts, overflowing trash cans, and groups of young men huddled on corners who stared openly at the luxury vehicle. "Here," Serena said, pointing to a crumbling 4-story brick building. The front door had been broken off its hinges years ago. Graffiti covered the lower walls. "Stop here." The driver looked nervous. "Sir, this isn't a safe area to park the vehicle." "Wait here," Arthur ordered. "Lock the doors. If anyone touches the car, give them $100 and tell them to watch it." Arthur stepped out onto the cracked pavement. He looked up at the building. It was a place where hope went to die. A place of survival, not living. He adjusted his suit jacket, looking utterly out of place, yet marching toward the entrance with the determination of a soldier. "4th floor," Serena said, leading the way. "The elevator hasn't worked since 2010. They climbed the stairs in silence. The stairwell smelled of old cabbage and damp plaster. With every step up, Arthur seemed to age a year. The guilt was a physical weight on his shoulders. He was the billionaire king of New York, yet the woman he had loved, the The woman he thought had abandoned him had been living in this squalor. They reached apartment 4B. The number was written on the door in black marker because the brass number had fallen off. Serena unlocked the door. The sound of the key turning was loud in the quiet hallway. "Mum," she called out softly. "I'm home early, and I brought someone." The apartment was tiny. It was essentially one room divided by a curtain, but it was meticulously clean. Despite the poverty, there was dignity here. Cheap paper flowers in a jar, photos of Serena growing up taped to the peeling wallpaper. But the sound of wheezing dominated the room. Lying on a sagging sofa bed in the corner was Margaret Vance. She was 48, but she looked 70. Her hair, once a vibrant gold that Arthur remembered running his fingers through, was now grey and thin. Her skin was pale, almost translucent. She didn't open her eyes immediately. "Serena, did you get the medicine? My chest feels like there's an elephant on it today." Serena rushed to her side, dropping her bag. "I didn't get the medicine yet, Mama. But please, you have to wake up. You have to look." Arthur stood in the doorway. He was frozen. He felt like an intruder in a shrine of suffering that he had unknowingly built. He took a step forward. The floorboard creaked. Margaret's eyes fluttered open. They were the same blue as Arthur's. They were the same blue as Serena's. She looked at Serena. Then her gaze drifted past her daughter to the tall, silver-haired man in the tuxedo standing in the shadows of her kitchen. Margaret squinted. She blinked, thinking it was a hallucination brought on by the fever and the pain. "Artie," she whispered. It was a sound so faint it barely existed, but it shattered Arthur Sterling. He rushed to the side of the bed, falling to his knees on the hard floor. He didn't care about his suit trousers. He grabbed her hand, a hand rough from years of scrubbing floors and washing clothes. "Maggie!" he choked out. "Oh my God, Maggie." Margaret pulled her hand back, trembling. No, you're dead. You're a ghost. His mother. She sent the letter. The crash in Nice. You died." "I didn't die!" Arthur cried, his voice cracking with 30 years of suppressed emotion. "I was in the hospital for 6 months. Yes. I was in a coma for 2 of them. But when I woke up, my mother told me you had left. She said you took the money she offered and ran away with another man. She said you never loved me." Margaret's eyes went wide. Tears began to stream down her sunken cheeks. "I never took a dime. I waited. I waited every day. And then the letter came, saying you were gone." "They lied," Arthur hissed, a dark rage bubbling under his grief. "My parents, they lied to both of us." Serena stood by the wall, watching this impossible scene unfold. The pieces were clicking into place, terrifyingly fast. "The ring," Margaret whispered. She fumbled under her pillow. Her weak fingers pulled out a small, velvet pouch. She shook it, and the ring fell into her palm. It was identical to the one on Arthur's hand, except smaller. A female version. The same obsidian, the same lion, the same ruby. "Show me yours," Margaret said, her voice stronger now, fueled by adrenaline. Arthur held out his hand. He placed his ring next to hers. The 2 lions faced each other. It was a custom set he had commissioned in 1995, defying his family's wish for him to marry a debutante. Margaret let out a sob that sounded like a wail. She reached up and touched Arthur's face. "You're real. You're old. But you're real." "I'm here," Arthur said, pressing his face into her palm. "I'm so sorry, Maggie. I'm so sorry I stopped looking. I believed them. I was a fool." He pulled back and looked at her. Then he turned his head slowly to look at Serena, who was crying silently by the door. Arthur looked back at Margaret. Maggie. The dates. Serena is 24. Margaret nodded slowly. She looked at her daughter with infinite love. I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after the letter came, Margaret said softly. I didn't have anyone. Your parents threatened to have me arrested if I came near the estate. So I came here. I raised her on my own. I named her Serena, because you once said, if we had a girl, she should have a name that means light. Arthur stood up slowly. He turned to Serena. He looked at her, not as a clumsy waitress, not as a stranger, but as the missing piece of his soul. He saw his own chin. He saw his mother's nose. He saw Margaret's spirit. My daughter, Arthur whispered. Serena didn't know what to do. Sir, Don't call me sir, Arthur said, his voice fierce. He stepped over and pulled Serena into a crushing hug. I am your father, and I swear to you, Serena, I swear on my life, nobody is ever going to hurt you or your mother again. This ends tonight. Suddenly, Margaret began to cough violently. Her body seized up, the monitor on her finger beeping erratically. Mum! Serena screamed, pulling away from Arthur. Margaret was gasping for air, her face turning grey. I can't. Arthur's demeanour instantly shifted from grieving lover to the CIO who commanded armies. The medicine. Where is it? We don't have it, Serena cried, panic rising. I needed the tips from tonight to buy it. The pharmacy closes in 20 minutes. Arthur grabbed his phone. He didn't dial a pharmacy. He dialed the number of the chief of medicine at Mount Sinai Hospital, a man whose research wing Arthur funded. Dr. Evans, Arthur barked. This is Arthur Sterling. I have a medical emergency. Congestive heart failure, acute respiratory distress. I am at... He looked at Serena for the address. 412 East 142nd Street, Serena yelled. You have the address, Arthur shouted into the phone. Send the chopper if you have to. Send an ambulance with a full cardiac team. You have 5 minutes. If she dies, Evans, I pull the funding. Get here now. He hung up and turned to Serena. Pack a bag, just the essentials. You aren't staying in this hellhole 1 second longer. But where are we going? Serena asked, holding her mother's hand. Arthur's eyes were cold again, but this time the fire behind them was terrifying. It was the fire of a man who had been robbed of his life and was ready to burn the world down to get it back. We are going to my home, Arthur said, and then I am going to introduce you to your stepmother. The next 20 minutes were a blur of controlled chaos that Serena would never forget. It was the first time she truly understood the terrifying power of unlimited wealth. Arthur had not exaggerated. 6 minutes after his phone call, the wail of sirens cut through the heavy Bronx air. It wasn't just one ambulance. It was a cavalcade. 2 paramedic units and a dark SUV carrying Dr. Evans himself, still wearing pajama pants tucked into his boots under a hastily thrown-on coat. They burst into the tiny apartment like a SEAL team taking down a target. There was no polite knocking, no hesitation. Clear the way! Dr. Evans barked at his team, immediately kneeling beside Margaret. He pulled out equipment that Serena had only seen on television dramas. Portable monitors began to beep. IVs were established with practiced speed, and an oxygen mask replaced the stale air Margaret was gasping for. Oxygen saturation is critical. Her heart is throwing PVCs like crazy, Evans muttered to Arthur, ignoring Serena entirely. We need to stabilize her before we move her. Arthur, what the hell happened? She hasn't had proper medication in weeks, judging by these rhythms. Fix it, Evans, Arthur growled, standing over them like a sentinel. He was still wearing his ruined tuxedo jacket. Just fix her. I don't care what it costs. If you need a new machine, buy the company that makes it. Serena stood, pressed against the peeling wallpaper, clutching a plastic grocery bag hastily stuffed with her mother's few precious items: the ring, a photo album, and a worn-out Bible. She felt completely useless, a spectator in her own tragedy. "Serena," Arthur said, his voice suddenly gentle, cutting through the medical jargon. He stepped over to her. "They've got her. She's going to be the most well-cared-for patient in New York City tonight." "She was just coughing," Serena whispered, trembling. "I didn't know it was this bad." "It's not your fault. You were drowning and nobody threw you a rope," Arthur said darkly. "That changes now." They loaded Margaret onto a stretcher. As they carried her down the narrow, graffiti-stained stairwell, neighbors poked their heads out of doors, eyes wide at the spectacle of top-tier medical professionals descending on apartment 4B. Outside, the street was bathed in the flashing red and white lights. "You ride with her," Arthur told Serena as they loaded Margaret into the back of the lead ambulance. "Hold her hand. Let her know she's safe. I'll follow in the car. We're going to Mount Sinai. The presidential suite is already being prepped." Serena climbed into the back of the rig. Before the doors closed, she looked back. Arthur Sterling was standing in the middle of the cracked street, surrounded by the squalor he had unknowingly left his family in for 2 decades. He looked like a king surveying a battlefield where he had lost everything that mattered, ready to wage a new war. The ride to Manhattan was fast. The ambulance tore through traffic that miraculously parted for them. Serena held her mother's limp hand, watching the heart monitor beep, a steady, reassuring rhythm now that the intravenous drugs were working. At the hospital, it was another whirlwind of VIP treatment. A private elevator whisked them to a floor that smelled like fresh lilies, not antiseptic. Margaret was settled into a room that looked more like a 5-star hotel suite than a hospital, complete with mahogany furniture and a view of the East River. Once Margaret was stable and sleeping peacefully under sedation, Arthur entered the room. He had shed the tuxedo jacket and rolled up his shirt sleeves. He looked exhausted, aged 10 years in 2 hours, but his eyes were burning with a manic energy. He walked to the bedside and stood looking down at Margaret for a long time. He gently brushed a strand of grey hair from her forehead. "I will never forgive them," he whispered to the sleeping woman. "My parents. I will never forgive them for stealing this time from us." He turned to Serena, who was sitting in a plush armchair in the corner, still clutching the plastic bag. "The nurses will stay with her tonight. Dr. Evans is sleeping in the adjoining room," Arthur said. "She is safe." "Thank you," Serena said, her voice raspy. "Mr. Sterling, I don't know how to repay you for this medical bill. I can work extra shifts, I can—" Arthur held up a hand, silencing her. The gesture was firm but not unkind. "Stop. Never say that again. You don't repay a father for taking care of his family." He extended a hand to her. "Come with me, Serena." "Where?" she asked. "Home," Arthur said. "We have unfinished business. It's time you saw where you should have grown up. And it's time my current wife learned that her free ride is over." The drive to the Sterling mansion on Fifth Avenue was practically silent. Serena sat in the back of the Maybach, overwhelmed. Just hours ago, she was terrified of spilling water on a rich woman's dress. Now, she was being told she was the rich woman. Her brain couldn't process the shift. It felt like a psychotic break. They pulled up to a massive limestone edifice that faced Central Park. It wasn't a house, it was a fortress of wealth. Iron gates swung open automatically. "This is where you live?" Serena managed to ask, looking up at the 4-story structure. It was beautiful, but cold. It lacked the warmth of the tiny Bronx apartment where her mother had taped up her crayon drawings. "This is where I sleep," Arthur corrected her as the car stopped. "It hasn't been a home in 20 years. The front door opened before they reached it. A butler with impeccable posture and a slightly panicked expression stood there. "Good evening, Mr. Sterling. We weren't expecting you back so soon. Mrs. Sterling returned an hour ago. She is in the drawing room, and she is displeased." "Excellent," Arthur said, his jaw set. "Jenkins, this is Serena. She is my daughter. From this moment on, this is her house. Anything she asks for, she gets. If she wants the Mona Lisa hanging in her bedroom, you find a way to steal it for her. Do you understand?" Jenkins, to his professional credit, didn't even blink. He bowed slightly to Serena. "Of course, sir. Welcome home, Miss Serena." Serena felt sick. She was still wearing her greasy sneakers. She stepped onto the polished marble foyer floor, feeling like she was dirtying it just by existing. "Arthur!" The shriek came from a large archway to the left. Vanessa Sterling appeared, holding a martini glass. She had changed out of the ruined red dress into a silk ivory negligee that probably cost more than Serena's car. Her makeup was smeared slightly under her eyes, indicating she'd been crying or raging. "How dare you abandon me at a restaurant?" Vanessa hissed, stalking toward him. "I had to get a taxi like a common peasant. Do you know how embarrassing that was? People were looking at me." She stopped dead when she saw Serena standing behind Arthur, trying to shrink into the marble wall. Vanessa's eyes narrowed into slits. "And you brought the help home? Arthur, have you lost your mind? Is this some sort of sick joke to humiliate me further? Get that filthy little creature out of my house before she steals the silverware." The air in the foyer seemed to drop 20 degrees. Arthur didn't yell. He didn't move toward her. He just looked at her with a profound, terrifying stillness. "Serena," Arthur said calmly, "please go into the library with Jenkins. I need to speak to my wife alone." "No," Vanessa snapped. "She stays right here. I want to know why you're sleeping with a waitress who can't even hold a tray straight. Is that it, Arthur? A midlife crisis? You picked up a piece of trash from the gutter to feel young again?" Arthur closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, the steel blue was Arctic. "Vanessa," he said, his voice frighteningly quiet, "you need to be very careful about the next words that come out of your mouth, because every insult you throw at that young woman is going to cost you about $1 million in the divorce settlement." Vanessa froze. The martini glass tilted dangerously in her hand. "Divorce? What are you talking about?" Arthur stepped aside, revealing Serena fully. He placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "You asked who she is," Arthur said. "She isn't the help. She isn't my mistress. Her name is Serena Sterling, and she is my firstborn child." Vanessa stared. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. She looked from Arthur to Serena, her brain trying to compute this impossible data. "You're lying," Vanessa whispered. "You don't have children. You hate children. You told me you never wanted them." "I was told my child died before she was born," Arthur said, the pain leaking into his voice. "I was lied to by people who claimed to love me, and for 30 years I believed it. But tonight, the lie ended. I found her, and I found her mother, the only woman I ever actually loved." Vanessa's shock morphed rapidly into defensive fury. "Her mother? That nobody you were mooning over in the restaurant? Arthur, this is insane. They are grifters. They saw your watch and concocted this story to scam you. You're smarter than this." "Look at her face, Vanessa," Arthur challenged. "Look at her eyes, and tell me she isn't mine." Vanessa didn't want to look, but she couldn't help it. She looked at Serena. She saw the resemblance. It was undeniable. The reality of her situation crashed down on her. No children meant she was the sole heir. A surprise daughter meant her slice of the pie just got significantly smaller. "So what?" Vanessa spat, changing tactics instantly to self-preservation. "You found a bastard brat. That doesn't mean you get to divorce me. We have a prenuptial agreement. You cheat on me, I get half. Everything." Arthur actually laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Cheat on you? Vanessa, I haven't touched you in 6 months. Our marriage was a business transaction. You wanted my status. I wanted a hostess for dinner parties. The contract is void." He stepped closer to her, his presence overwhelming. "You have an hour to pack your essentials. Jenkins will provide you with Louis Vuitton luggage if you require it. A car will take you to whatever hotel you wish. My lawyers will call you in the morning with a settlement offer. It will be generous, far more than you deserve after the way you treated my daughter tonight. Take it and disappear from my life." "You can't throw me out," Vanessa screamed, throwing the martini glass on the floor. It shattered on the marble, a mirror image of the restaurant incident hours earlier. "I am Mrs. Arthur Sterling. This is my house." "Not anymore," Arthur said. "You called my daughter trash. You treated her like something beneath your shoe because she was working for a living. You are a cruel, shallow woman, Vanessa, and I am done tolerating you." He turned his back on her screaming form. "Jenkins," Arthur said calmly to the butler, "escort Mrs. Sterling upstairs to pack. If she is not out of the house in 60 minutes, call security and have her removed for trespassing." "Right away, sir." Arthur took Serena's trembling arm and led her away from the shrieking woman toward the heavy oak doors of the library. As he closed the library doors behind them, shutting out the noise of Vanessa's meltdown, Arthur looked at his daughter. He looked tired, shattered, but also relieved. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he told Serena. "But it was necessary. We have to clear out the rot before we can build something new." He walked over to a wall safe, hidden behind a painting, and spun the dial. He pulled out a velvet box. He opened it, revealing a stunning diamond necklace, a family heirloom that made Vanessa's jewelry look like costume pieces. "This belonged to my grandmother," Arthur said gently. "It was supposed to go to your mother 30 years ago. Now, it's yours." Serena looked at the diamonds, then down at her stained apron. I don't belong here, Arthur. I'm just a waitress." Arthur snapped the box closed and looked her deep in the eyes. "No, you were a waitress because the world failed you. You are Serena Sterling. And starting tomorrow, we are going to make sure the world knows exactly who you are. And the first thing we're going to do is ruin the people who did this to your mother." The library of the Sterling mansion was a cavernous room filled with the smell of old leather and expensive scotch, the scent of power. But tonight, it smelled of impending doom. It was 2:00 a.m. Serena was sitting on a velvet sofa, wrapped in a cashmere blanket Arthur had given her. She was too wired to sleep. Her entire life had been rewritten in the span of 6 hours. She watched her father. She still struggled to think of him as that, pace back and forth in front of the fireplace. "Jenkins," Arthur said into the intercom on his desk. "Is he here yet?" "Mr. Thorne has just arrived, sir," the butler's voice crackled. "He seems perturbed by the hour. Send him in." A moment later, the heavy doors opened. Silas Thorne walked in. He was a man in his late 60s, impeccably dressed, with eyes like a shark that had stopped swimming. He had been the Sterling family attorney and fixer for 40 years. He knew where every body was buried because he had usually held the shovel. "Arthur," Silas said, his voice smooth and devoid of sleepiness. "It is 2 a.m. I assume the stock market has crashed, or you've killed someone. Those are the only 2 reasons to wake me." Arthur stopped pacing. He turned to face the older man. "Sit down, Silas." Silas raised an eyebrow, but sat in the wingback chair opposite Serena. He glanced at her, his eyes lingering on her face for a fraction of a second too long. A flicker of recognition, or perhaps fear. "Who is this?" Silas asked, gesturing vaguely at Serena. "One of your charities?" "That," Arthur said, his voice dangerously low, "is Serena Sterling, my daughter." Silas didn't flinch. He didn't gasp. He simply froze, his posture becoming rigid. "You don't have a daughter, Arthur. We have been over this. The girl died in the womb. Margaret Vance disappeared. It was a tragedy, but it was 25 years ago." Arthur walked over to the wall safe, the same one where he had retrieved the necklace. But this time he reached deeper, pulling out a small, rusted metal box. He slammed it onto the coffee table in front of Silas. The sound was like a gunshot. "I found this," Arthur lied. He hadn't found it yet. But he knew Silas. He knew the man never destroyed leverage. "And tonight, I found her." He pointed at Serena. "And I found Margaret, alive, living in squalor in the Bronx, while you sat in your Park Avenue penthouse collecting fees from my trust fund." Silas stared at the box. He remained silent. "Margaret told me she wrote to me," Arthur continued, circling the lawyer like a predator. "She said she wrote every week for a year after I died. She said she sent photos of the baby. She said she begged for help when she couldn't afford rent." Arthur leaned down, his face inches from Silas's. "Where are the letters, Silas?" The lawyer sighed. He adjusted his cufflinks. He realized the game was up. There was no point in denying it when the living proof was sitting 5 feet away with Arthur Sterling's chin and eyes. "They are in the archive," Silas said quietly. "File 77 Bravo, restricted access. Your mother ordered them intercepted. She said a waitress from Queens was not suitable stock for the Sterling bloodline. She ordered me to tell Margaret you were dead. She ordered me to tell you Margaret had aborted the child and run off with a bartender." Serena let out a small gasp. The cruelty was so calculated, so industrial. They hadn't just ignored her mother. They had actively engineered her destruction. "And you did it," Arthur whispered. "You looked me in the eye when I woke up from my coma, and you lied to me. You stole my life." "I protected the estate," Silas snapped, his veneer cracking. "You were young. You were reckless. You would have thrown away a billion-dollar legacy for a fling. It was my job to protect the family name." "You didn't protect the family," Arthur roared, grabbing Silas by his lapels and hauling him out of the chair. "You destroyed it. You left my wife to rot. You left my child to starve." Arthur threw the older man back into the chair. He was panting, his fists clenched. "You are fired, Silas. Effective immediately. But I'm not just firing you." Arthur walked to his desk and picked up his phone. "I have the district attorney on speed dial. I have evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. You falsified death records. You intercepted federal mail. By the time the sun comes up, you won't just be disbarred. You will be in a holding cell." Silas turned pale. "Arthur, be reasonable. I know everything about this company. You can't take me down without hurting yourself." "Watch me," Arthur said. "Get out of my house. The police will be waiting for you at the gate." Silas Thorne, the man who had controlled the Sterling destiny from the shadows for decades, stood up shakily. He looked at Serena one last time, a look of pure hatred, and shuffled out of the room. Arthur collapsed onto the sofa next to Serena. He put his head in his hands. He was trembling. Serena reached out and touched his shoulder. It was the first time she had initiated contact. "Is it true?" she asked softly. "Did they really keep the letters?" Arthur looked up, tears streaming down his face. "We will find them tomorrow, Serena. We will read every single one. I promise." 3 days later, the sun was shining brightly over Manhattan, a stark contrast to the rainy night that had changed everything. Margaret Vance was sitting up in her hospital bed at Mount Sinai. The color had returned to her cheeks. Her hair had been washed and brushed. She no longer looked like a ghost. She looked like a woman who had fought a war and finally won. Serena sat on the edge of the bed, holding her mother's hand. The room was filled with flowers, thousands of dollars worth of roses, lilies, and orchids. "It feels like a dream," Margaret whispered, looking around the luxury suite. "I keep waiting to wake up back in the apartment with the leaking ceiling." "It's not a dream, Mum," Serena smiled. "It's real. The doctors said your heart is strong. You just needed rest. You just needed peace." The door opened, and Arthur walked in. He was different now. The tension that had held his shoulders for decades was gone. He was wearing casual clothes, a sweater and slacks, something Serena had never seen on a billionaire before. He carried a small velvet box. "Good morning, ladies," Arthur said, his eyes crinkling with a genuine smile. He walked to the bedside and kissed Margaret's forehead. "How is the patient?" "Better," Margaret said, blushing like a teenager. "Much better." Arthur pulled a chair close. He took Margaret's hand, careful of the IV line. "Margaret," he began, his voice serious. 30 years ago, I gave you a promise ring. I promised I would come back from France and marry you. I promised we would build a life." He opened the box. Inside was not the old signet ring. It was a diamond, a massive, flawless solitaire that caught the morning light and threw rainbows across the sterile hospital walls. "I am 30 years late," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I cannot give us back the time we lost. I can't give us back the school plays or the birthdays or the quiet Sunday mornings, but I can give you the rest of my life. Margaret Vance, will you finally marry me?" Margaret put a hand to her mouth. Tears spilled over, but they were happy tears. "You foolish old man," she laughed through her sobs. "I've been married to you in my heart since 1995. Yes, of course." Serena watched them, tears streaming down her own face. For the first time in her life, the knot of anxiety in her stomach, the constant worry about rent, about food, about medicine, unraveled completely. She took a deep breath. The air felt lighter. Arthur slid the ring onto Margaret's finger. It fit perfectly. "And you," Arthur turned to Serena. "I have something for you, too." He handed her a thick leather folder. "What is this?" Serena asked. "I went to the restaurant this morning," Arthur said. "I spoke to the owner. Or I should say, the former owner." Serena's eyes widened. "Arthur, what did you do?" "I bought Le Palais," Arthur said casually, as if he had bought a carton of milk. "And I transferred the deed. It's yours, Serena. You're not a waitress anymore. You're the owner. You can run it however you see fit." Serena gaped at him. I don't know how to run a restaurant. I just serve the food." "You know more about that place than anyone," Arthur insisted. "You know what the staff needs. You know what the customers want. You have a good heart, Serena. That's what makes a good leader. Besides, you'll have the best consultants in the city to help you. But the vision? That's yours." Serena looked down at the deed. Serena Sterling, proprietor. She thought of Pierre. She thought of the chefs who screamed. She thought of the bus boys who worked 12 hours for minimum wage. "Okay," Serena said, a slow smile spreading across her face. "I'll take it. But I'm going to make some changes." 6 months later, the reopening of Le Palais was the social event of the season. But it wasn't the stuffy, terrified atmosphere it used to be. The lighting was warmer. The music was livelier. And the staff was smiling. Serena Sterling stood by the entrance, wearing a stunning emerald green gown that matched her eyes. She greeted guests by name. She wasn't hiding in the shadows. She was the center of the room. Arthur and Margaret sat at table 9, the best seat in the house. Margaret looked radiant in a blue silk dress, her health fully restored. They held hands across the table, watching their daughter command the room. "She's a natural," Arthur said, sipping his wine. "She gets it from you," Margaret teased. "The bossiness, I mean." Suddenly the kitchen door swung open. Pierre, the former manager, walked out. He wasn't wearing his tuxedo. He was wearing a simple waiter's uniform. He looked humbled. Serena had not fired him. She had given him a choice: leave with a severance package, or stay and work his way up from the bottom, learning to treat people with respect. To everyone's surprise, Pierre had stayed. He needed the money, yes, but he also seemed to crave the redemption. He approached table 9 with a tray. His hands were steady, but his eyes were lowered in deference. "Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Sterling," Pierre said politely. "Here is your appetizer. The chef prepared it specifically for you." "Thank you, Pierre," Arthur said. He didn't sneer, he didn't belittle, he simply accepted the service. As Pierre walked away, the front door opened. The chatter in the room didn't stop, but a few heads turned. Vanessa entered. She looked different. Her hair was a little less perfectly coiffed. Her dress was off the rack. She wasn't there to eat. She was there because she had heard the rumors, and her narcissism demanded she see it for herself. She spotted Arthur and Margaret. She saw the way Arthur looked at Margaret, with a devotion he had never, not once, shown Vanessa. Vanessa scanned the room and locked eyes with Serena. Serena stopped greeting a senator and walked over to Vanessa. The room went quiet. People remembered the incident with the spilled scotch. "Hello, Vanessa," Serena said coolly. "So," Vanessa sneered, though her voice lacked its usual bite. "You're playing restaurant owner now? Daddy bought you a toy?" "He bought me an opportunity," Serena corrected her. "And I'm using it to pay my staff a living wage, something you wouldn't understand." Vanessa looked around. She saw the way the city's elite were looking at Serena, with respect, not just tolerance. She realized she had lost. She had lost the money, the status, and the narrative. "I just came to retrieve a scarf I left in the coat check months ago," Vanessa lied, clutching her purse. "Check with the front desk," Serena said, dismissing her. "And Vanessa, if you want a table, the wait list is 3 months long. But for you, I can make an exception. Table 44 is free. It's near the kitchen. You can smell the onions." A few guests nearby chuckled. Vanessa turned bright red. She spun on her heel and marched out the door, back into the cold Manhattan night, alone. Serena watched her go, feeling a sense of closure. She turned back to the room. She saw her mother laughing. She saw her father smiling. She saw the ring on her father's hand, the lion with the scarred eye, glinting in the candlelight. She touched the necklace at her throat. "Table 9 needs water," she heard a busboy whisper frantically to a new server. "I got it," Serena said, stepping in. She grabbed a water pitcher. "But, Ms. Sterling, you're the owner," the busboy said, shocked. Serena smiled. "I'm a Sterling," she said, "but I'll always be a waitress at heart." She walked toward her parents' table, pitcher in hand, ready to serve the people she loved. And that is how a spilled drink and a simple gold ring brought a billionaire to his knees and reunited a family that was never meant to be broken. It took 30 years, but justice was finally served, not just in a courtroom, but in the heart of that restaurant. This story reminds us that True legacy isn't about the money in your bank account. It's about the people you fight for. Arthur Sterling had billions, but he was a pauper until he found his daughter and the woman he loved. Serena proved that dignity isn't something you buy, it's something you carry, whether you're wearing an apron or a ball gown. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, redemption, and romance, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow so I can bring you more long-form stories like this one. What would you have done if you were Serena? Would you have forgiven the father? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a twist. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.